come on, guys, if Vogue is willing to do it because they see a connection and interest between their female audience and cars, then where are the rest of you?
Hello and welcome to Green Queens,
the perfect podcast for imperfect environmentalists.
We are your hosts. We're so annoying.
Oh, dear. You carry on.
Well, we are your hosts. I'm Abby, you finish it.
I am Imogen Bogle.
And you'd think that by series 3/4, because we don't really know what we're going to call this, we would know how to do the intro by now. Alas, we do not.
And yet every time I edit it, I always have a little joy that we just mess it up every single time. And also, not only do we mess it up, we choose not to rectify it. And that's great.
We know our strengths and the intro ain't one of them. We're a slow burn, as they say. It gets better when you listen, which is really good incentive to listen right till the end.
So we've got a bit of a special episode today, and we're being a little bit snappier with our intro because we know that we have a tendency to gas on, I should say. But we met each other last week in Barcelona, which was a bit of a novelty. It was really fun. But it was a last-minute invitation to drive Cupra's latest electric vehicle, the Raval, which will be launched properly next year. And if you picture the Raval, it's kind of very much Renault 5 competitor for those who know their EVs. But for those who know their internal combustion engine cars, it's like, think Vauxhall Astra, VW Polo GT kind of competitor. Cool urban car, we should say.
Yes. And I think that is something that we are going to see a bit of next year, isn't it? 2026 is probably going to be the year of the maybe slightly smaller, more affordable, I'd like to say, price point. I think it retails at €26,000 starting at next year. So we were sort of trying to compare who might buy it. And we were saying that there's we all went to school with that kind of wealthier person that might have got a VW Polo or something as their first car. Or like a cooler, hipper parent that might also have rocked up in one. And this definitely could be that, we think.
100%. It would have been the kid at school who was definitely in a sports team.
Yeah.
Their parents had a hot tub. They were probably the house that you went to for house parties, not least because they were the first in the year to turn 18 and had these fancy cars. And then everyone else was like, here's my third hand. What did I have? Oh my God, what was it?
What's your first car?
Oh, I can picture the registration plate. Toyota Yaris. There we go. Yaris. Very economical.
It was Red Mini, 2003 plate. It had one owner and it had done about 12,000 miles. And we bid for it on eBay. And then I put eyelashes on it.
No, I didn't realise that you were responsible for the eyelashes, but that makes much more sense.
Well, yeah, I was. And now when I see people with the eyelashes, I'm like... And then that was me when I was 17. But, we live and learn. And I've learned that eyelashes on a vehicle are not necessary.
But delightful nonetheless. And whilst we were at this launch, now we've both been to a number of these different launches with our various different hats on. And they are interesting because these are opportunities for a combination of motoring journalists and also content creators to come and experience these cars and either write their articles or produce YouTube videos or social media content, etc., etc. And they are a bizarre concoction of people who are influencers and are lifestyle influencers, and then also people who've been doing this for sort of 20 or 30 years. And they are typically male. And it's very strange for us to be there because we exist very firmly between these two ends of the spectrum. And so we were kind of thinking about all of this and we were like, right, there is one person who we need to speak to kind of, untangle this interesting phenomenon, and that is Erin Baker. And she is the UK's most senior female motoring journalist. She's Editorial Director of Auto Trader, motoring contributor to Vogue, Marie Claire, Vanity Fair, host of the Women in the Driving Seat podcast, and she is actually probably the global expert in automotive content that drives female purchases of cars, and especially EVs. So we thought, who else is better equipped to have this discussion? So we will be hearing from her throughout this podcast.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we established as well when we were we've known of Erin for many years and appreciated the articles that she's written and the work that she's done, but not only is she the UK's most senior female automotive journalist, she's probably just one of the UK's most senior automotive journalists, going. She's her career is 20 plus years now. She writes for Vogue, which is just so cool. What a dream come true that must be. But also, it was really interesting chatting to her, because even though, yes, she writes for Vogue, and you're like, yeah, the magazines are getting it, that women might actually want to know a little bit more about cars too before they go and spend best part of 20 grand on something. But actually, not a lot of other publications are there yet, and that is, it's definitely an uphill battle, I think, in this space, isn't it? But yeah, we will be hearing that full chat later. And it was really fascinating, especially because a lot of the stuff that she does and a lot of the things that she had to say were purely based on data. So this isn't even like speculative. You know, we all go for a coffee sometimes and go, oh my God, isn't it mad how this and this, and you can back it up with absolutely nothing. You can't substantiate those claims at all. She absolutely can. And I find that really, really fascinating.
She's the antithesis of, so I read an article, and someone will be like, you didn't read an article, you saw a TikTok. She actually has data and is extremely wise, and also a great advocate for women generally. But before we get into our experience with Cupra, some incredible insights from Erin, we thought it was worth doing a bit of a 101 on electric cars, bring us all up to speed, put us all on the same page.
Yes.
So we can
And even though I drive them and I know a bit about them, you definitely know more than I do. So please tell me everything that I need to know. Imagine I'd never driven one. What would you tell me?
All right. Okay. I'm going to try and keep this really brief. I do not want to be boring here. Simply speaking, what is an electric vehicle? Well, it's a vehicle that has a battery and an electric motor instead of having an engine and being fueled by petrol. So those batteries can come in various different sizes, and depending on the efficiency and the size of that battery, that will determine the range of your vehicle. So quite often a bit of misinformation that we hear is that electric vehicles don't have very much range. That was definitely true about 8 years ago, but things have transformed enormously. So today, the average EV has a 300-mile range.
Does
And
it?
if you see an EV that has less than that, it's because it's got a smaller battery and it has been designed specifically to have that smaller range. If you had an urban, like a car that you're only going to drive around a city, you know, the average person drives around 10 to 30 miles a day. It doesn't need kind of that 300-mile range. The other big question is around price. And again, typically EVs were more expensive. That's because they started in the sort of premium SUV market. Today, there are a ton of EVs that are under £30,000. There's a suite of vehicles that have arrived this year that are under 25. So things like the Renault 5 have been enormously popular. But the things that make them more compelling from a price perspective is, one, there's really compelling things offered via salary sacrifice schemes. So you pay substantially less benefit in kind tax on an EV compared to like a petrol car. So you can save, you know, hundreds of pounds pre-tax by leasing a car that way. In the second-hand EV market, which we know about 90% of car purchases are made in the second-hand market, we're now seeing price parity with a petrol or diesel equivalent. And also the UK government has recently introduced an electric car grant, which means that you can get about £3,750 off a EV that sits, I think, below £35,000. So again, like some really good things. And last but by no means least, if you have a driveway and you can charge at home, you can be charging at about 9p. Let's make the maths easy. Let's say a maximum of like 10p per kilowatt hour. That means that if you've got a battery that's about 50 kilowatt hours, which is roughly average, 10p times 50 is £5. So you could charge that car for £5. And actually that's when you start to see that your total cost of ownership of these cars is much, much lower compared to a petrol equivalent, where you might be filling up for like 40, 50 quid or whatever. Last thing I will say is that there has been a huge influx of different brands, some coming from China, but even the traditional OEMs providing loads more electric cars. There's now, I think, I'm going to check the numbers on here, but I think there's over 130 different electric vehicles that are available here in the UK. And final two things that I'll say, I did say that that was the last one, but I think this brings us nicely up to speed, is that you might have heard of the electric vehicle mandate. And basically, and sometimes it's called like a petrol diesel ban. It's not quite that, but basically between now and 2035, the proportion of cars that brands need to sell that are electric will gradually increase. So in 2025, 28% of a brand's cars that it sells need to be electric. That will eventually be 100% in 2035. But let's not forget that lots of cars are bought in the secondhand market, so you will still be able to buy petrol and diesel cars beyond that point.
I think this is one of the biggest common misconceptions, really, is that people saying, "Oh, well, my hands are tied. I'm going to be forced to get rid of my petrol and diesel car," and that is absolutely not true. You can run any car that you currently have to the ground and have it to the day that you die, if you so please. You know, regardless of whether it's an EV or a petrol and diesel car, like, it's going to be years before we properly start to phase those cars out, isn't it? And you know, people can still buy them brand new now. It's just that will happen less and less over the next few years.
100%. And I think there are two notable things mentioning, and then I promise I'll shut up and we'll talk about Cupra. But just let's all squish this information into one bit and then we can crack on with the fun and juicy bits. And that is, like, you know, people say, well, the battery, surely that's got quite a high environmental footprint, and I'm not just going to ditch my petrol and diesel car in order to get a car that's had a battery that's quite intense to make. That is true. You absolutely should drive your vehicle into the ground until destruction, because in the manufacture of that vehicle, it has embedded carbon. It took carbon and CO2 to manufacture that vehicle. Now, the manufacture of an electric car using virgin materials, so the first time they've been dug out of the ground, so let's take lithium, the first time it's been dug out of the ground, that car will have a higher environmental footprint at manufacture compared to the equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. However, that carbon debt is paid back after about 9,000 miles of driving, so less than a year of driving, at which point your internal combustion engine car will continue to pollute because you're just putting in fuel, you're burning it, it's polluting the atmosphere. The electric car will, especially if you can charge it using renewable electricity, will not only not produce emissions at the tailpipe, but will continue to not produce any really further emissions. Lastly, at the end of its life, you can recycle a lot of the materials that are within the battery or repurpose the battery for second life. And the only waste that you generate from that electric car would equate to about a 30 kilo ball of materials. Meanwhile, in a petrol or diesel car, the amount of fuel that it would burn over the course of its lifetime that you cannot recover, that you cannot recycle, would equate to, if you were to stack barrels of oil on top of each other, it would be 90 meters tall. So then you compare 30 kilos of waste to 90 meters of barrels of oil. It is kind of astonishing. And the last thing we should mention is charging. And right now there's like 87,000 public chargers. Many of those are basically half are rapid chargers. And basically the higher the number of kilowatts, the faster the charger that you'll get.
And I think that would be my advice to anybody that is thinking about making the switch, is do a bit of research around charging, because it unfortunately is a bit messy. It's not been made the most seamless, straightforward thing. It's not overly complicated once you know what you're looking for. But I think because it's numbers and it's letters and it's acronyms and it's not been, a very straightforward process in terms of exactly what a petrol station looks like. They all look very different. They come in different shapes and sizes. That's where, if you're going to spend any amount of time, if you're going to spend 10 minutes researching anything, I would spend 10 minutes researching a little bit of knowledge on public charging. But we definitely should stop with the information overload now.
The brief was not information overload. And I was like, but these are the things that people really need to know. Oh God. But anyway.
Well, I enjoyed it a lot. And I really enjoyed also driving a pre-production car. I felt like I was an MI5 or something. The car was fully camouflaged. It's all completely embargoed. It felt very top secret. And
without further ado, we should hand over to our past selves who are in Barcelona, and also to our not so past selves, chatting to the wonderful Erin Baker. So we have come to Cupra's headquarters just outside of Barcelona to test the brand new Cupra Raval, which is their little teeny tiny EV that's going to be going to production at some point next year.
And we are so lucky to be here because this is a pre-production car. And generally with a pre-production car, you expect there to be a few niggles because it's not yet in that full-scale manufacture. You expect a couple of things to go wrong. But it is very brave of Cupra to invite us because they've invited us to test the driving dynamics of this particular model. And we're on these twisty, twiny mountain roads. They want it to feel like a go-kart, and my word, it really, really does. I will say though, we're driving in convoy, and I am very, very far behind the people in front of me, so I think they are slightly putting the car through its paces in a slightly more aggressive way than I am.
So I'm having one of those days where I kind of can't believe that this is my job because I am driving around beautiful streets on the outskirts of Barcelona. Imogen is in the back.
Hello.
Not mic'd up, but she's had her drive. I'm now having my drive of this car, which is going to go into production next year, fully electric. And we both just compared it to what we imagine it would be like to drive a car when you are 5 years old and the only thing you've ever driven is a Barbie Jeep. This is what we imagine driving as an adult would feel like in a car like this. It is very futuristic. It is obviously fully electric, therefore winding up and down the hills is super fun and super easy. I've done pretty much this entire journey, 20 minutes so far, on one pedal because the regen braking is sensational. And the little quirks of the additional electric noises that this car has when you put it into performance mode make it for just a very, very fun drive.
We have just gone from comfort mode, which I was finding very enjoyable, and then we pressed Cupra mode, and there's a manufactured sound which does not do it justice. I feel bad for saying manufactured sound, but a sound, you know, EVs are really silent, and so car brands can have a few choices. Either they can make the cabin extremely quiet to mask the road noise, which you now hear because you haven't got an engine masking that noise, or they can choose to manufacture a particular sound that gives you that sense of driving feel. And that is no mean feat because you don't, until you hear certain sounds, you don't stop to think about how they can inspire a certain sense of quality or not. And actually creating sound that feels high quality, that matches what you happen to be doing, for example, accelerating, is really amazing. And sometimes in EVs where they have manufactured engine sound, they've tried to replicate an engine. So for example, I think the Abarth does that. Now, that to my mind is a bit gimmicky. And so you do have this opportunity to say, well, why don't we create a new sound and make something that leans into the electric motor? And I think that's what this does really well. It's got the right balance of, okay, yes, let's create something that inspires that sense of movement that does feel reminiscent of a petrol engine, but also let's be electric about it, and let's, you know, maximize the whir you may imagine from an electric motor. So I like it, I really do.
We were saying that we think this will be a brilliant car if this is the first EV that you have ever driven or ever get. It's a really good price point, it's a really good size, it's going to be a great city car, but also if you live in the suburbs or you do longer journeys, it's going to be totally manageable because the range is around the sort of 230 to 250 mark. In fact, I think it even goes up, one of the higher models goes up to about 280, Imogen, doesn't it? So that is a perfect car for the UK, and this is a really fun EV to drive.
We are both so lucky in our jobs that we get to try loads and loads of different EVs, and we were just reflecting that actually over the past 4 or 5 years, the range of different electric vehicles that are now on the market and just how good they are is astonishing. It's like, you know, comparing 2019 to 2025, chalk and cheese. Now, this Cupra is really exciting, I think, because it's going to be the cheapest of the Cupra lineup, or I should say most affordable. It is going to start at around 26,000 euros, and electric vehicles have been criticised really for being quite expensive. And that is the case with any kind of new technology. It takes some time for the technology to mature and get a little bit cheaper. So we are starting to see that wave of much more affordable EVs. Now, if you were genuinely considering this, the other things that you might have in your hypothetical shopping basket would be something like the Renault 5, you might be looking forward to the ID2, you maybe even have considered the BYD Dolphin or the BYD Dolphin Surf. And really it depends, what is it that you want from a car? Is it something that's just like deeply practical, or do you enjoy the thrill of driving? And if it is the latter, this has been the most pleasant surprise, because this has been all around connecting driver to the road. Some EVs have been criticised in the past for not having that kind of really joyful driving dynamics. And this really does feel like a little go-kart. And actually, the infotainment screen has been super intuitive, because you can slide things from, for example, performance to comfort, and you can change the sort of harshness of the drive, or sort of how firm it feels. And around these twisty, twiny roads, you do want to feel super connected to the road. Also, for the sake of the camera, Abby is currently in the back, not mic'd up, which I know is torturous.
For me.
For Abby.
We've both been passenger princesses also in the back. And I think it's been really nice to have a feel for both, because often when you are looking at buying a car, you don't get the chance to sit in the back. And sometimes it's a whole new world back there. And when it comes to the Cupra performance mode, where you get these really cool electric spaceship-esque sounds, which by the way is a technical automotive term, I would say that is, can you hear it? It's happening now. That is more fun as a passenger princess. Imogen, would you agree?
Yes, I really agree.
Yes.
You can hear it in this back speaker.
Yes, you can hear it in the back speaker. It's a very sensory drive. There's a lot going on.
This was very much pitched as a more affordable end of the market, something that was going to be a young, family, sporty, urban-y type car, and I definitely think it ticks all of those boxes.
We had a lovely time, and there is no doubt that the Raval is set for a big year, and it is genuinely cool to see Cupra pushing to establish itself as a cool EV brand. And yes, I know I cannot say the word cool. But back in the UK, we could not ignore how many automotive content creators and motoring journalists at launches are men. Now, considering that many women find the car buying process unwelcoming, and most EV buyers are still men despite women making up nearly half of UK drivers, it raises a question. What responsibility do car companies and the media have in fixing this imbalance, and particularly when it comes to electric vehicles? Which is why it felt like the perfect moment to catch up with Erin Baker, the UK's most senior female motoring journalist.
Well, you're right. There is a certain kind of demographic to motoring journalists. I don't think that's just confined to the UK, probably globally. I've been a motoring journalist for 25 years. And I think, when I started, I came crashing into the industry as motoring editor of The Telegraph when I was in my late 20s. And I was so aware of being one of this was the early 2000s. I was one of, 5 female motoring journalists in the country. And I made that huge mistake of trying to make myself ultra blokey, because I thought I better double down on, limited slip differentials and that kind of knowledge, because that's where it's at and that's how I'll get respect. And it saddens me now so much, because for the first 10 years, I would say, of my career, I missed that opportunity to highlight what made me different from all the other motoring journalists out there, that I had a female perspective on the product, on the brand, on the experience of driving in the UK, and that actually there are loads of women out there driving cars. 46% of license holders in this country are female. In the States right now, the majority car buyer is female. And that I think that will end up the case in the UK as well. So it's not even a matter of women being a significant minority that we really need to pay attention to. Women are, and by the way, it's not a case of women being, they're the majority influence in the purchasing decision. I hate that stack. It's like kind of behind every man there's a good woman.
Yeah.
Women are becoming the primary driver and the primary purchaser of vehicles. So, we have the few women that are in the industry, we have to shout louder. We have to shout in a way that reflects who we are, our different needs, our different emotions and responses to cars, because all the women out there looking to buy a car are relying on us.
Do you think that speaks of the time, though? Like, you know, if you were coming into this industry now and the way that the world is now, you would approach it differently. I don't think that was necessarily you know, just you making that decision to behave that way because that's how you felt like you had to behave. That was the early 2000s in a lot of industries, particularly, you know, male-dominated industries. So I think it's testament to the time, and I think it feels quite, I don't want to speak for you, but I imagine it still feels quite depressing that 20, you know, we're in 2025 now, and it, you know, it was really quite eye-opening for Imogen and myself being on the shoot. Imogen, you're probably used to it. This is one of the first, I've done a handful of these kind of car events now, if you like, but I do think this one, particularly because it was quite a last-minute invite for both of us, and I did think to myself, if we wouldn't have been able to come to this, there would literally be no women driving this pre-production car, giving feedback to the research and development people. So then how is this still happening?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because coming back to your point about the split between influencers and motoring journalists, and you're right, I see it all the time. What really saddens me is that split is still a gender split as well, right? The majority of car influencers that I see are women because car brands feel like they need to have a lifestyle element on the launch, and that lifestyle element has got to be female influencers. And the serious, proper motoring journalists who know about the product are the guys.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm one of the few, I suppose, serious, proper motoring journalists who's a woman, but I have to sit with the motoring journalists at their end of the table and not with the influencers, because we're all kind of speaking a different language, and it's very siloed still, and it's very split, and it is still split along gender lines. And my beef out there is about trying to get more women to become motoring journalists, to be the people that understand the industry, can interrogate the engineers and the manufacturers about everything from their sustainability credentials to why they've designed a car a certain way, the carbon footprint of the car, and so on, and really get to know the executives, get to know what's going on in the financial heart of the industry, so that they, you know, they're proper interrogative journalists, investigative, who are putting these OEMs under pressure to be responsible about the environment and all those sorts of things. I'm not interested in creating yet more fluffy content that's just going to reach 2 million people, but no one's actually going to engage and buy the car. They just, you know, it's all so surface level. Absolutely, there's a place for it, but it's not mine, and I want to get more women in at the deep end.
And you know, this is, I think you've perfectly captured how I feel about this as well, because when I stop and think about what is it that I love about the car industry, it's the fact that, like, you have this huge industry that impacts geopolitics, supply chains, skills, tens upon the tens of thousands of people and their jobs and their skills. But at the end of it, you get this consumer product that is emotional, that, you know, can say so many things about how it may appear in a film, what that says about the characters. It has this whole other aspect of it. And I don't think there's another industry that does that in quite the same way. And my personal perspective is that what I think is missing sometimes from the sort of real OG, old school motoring journalists is they can talk about the financials of the organization. They can talk very, very eloquently about driving feel and the engineering sort of decisions behind the car, but less about how that translates into impacts in your daily life. E.g., it performs this kind of way from a steering and handling perspective. If you suffer with motion sickness, that might be a problem for you. Or the boot is this size, that means that actually getting X, Y, Z in at the weekend is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
It's that I think gets lost sometimes.
And also, you know, my background is not motoring journalism, it's journalism. You know, all I ever wanted to do when I left university was work on a national newspaper and be a national journalist with my byline in print, and you know that's happened for me, and that's great. But because of that, I've got a lot of female friends who are just national newspaper journalists, and a lot of them are quite interested in cars, and you know, and quite keen to maybe get into the car industry a bit, and do a bit of motoring journalism. But they approach it from the point of view of, like, one of my great friends, Jo Elvin, who will be known to many, I'm sure, founding editor of Glamour magazine and all sorts of things. And she said, like, why do no motoring journalists write about just their emotional relationship with the car, the memories they have of driving, the incredible family moments in the car, and those sorts of things? Because that that sells cars. And we see that in display advertising, don't we? If you get a family-friendly brand like Volvo or someone, I don't know, you don't have a picture of the car in the studio. You have a picture of the car in the woods with the family going on the picnic. The advertising is trying to build that relationship between driver and car. I don't know why, as motoring journalists, we're not so invested in that.
So when you look at kind of brands that are doing this better than others, do you have any on your list that you're like, they get it, they understand the brief and how we need to be more inclusive?
See, this is a really fundamentally depressing question that I get asked quite a lot because the list is really short. I think hardly any are, and if they are doing it well, it's as a byproduct of just what the DNA of that brand is in the first place. So, for example, to go back to somebody like Volvo or a Scandinavian brand, they're going to get it more because it's the Scandinavian brand, and the Scandinavians are so good on gender equality, you know, and lifestyle and the great outdoors and all that. So it ties in quite well. Mini do it well because Mini is a brand inherently about personification and bespoke design and, you know, little runarounds for in town and heavy on styles. They're going to do it well. I think in terms of proactively gunning for women and reaching out to women and trying to understand them, you've got to put Genesis up there because they came to Europe with that in mind. They saw the gap in the market and really went for it with, you know, their shops in shopping malls and the way they styled them and test drives from home and all these kind of other ideas. I mean, it's funny because I would now point less to brands as markers of who's doing it well and more to certain retailer groups, actually. And I think that's interesting because retailers have always got the sharp end of the stick in this conversation, you know, and everyone's always said, that's where the relationship between women and the industry is falling down. Everyone has a bad experience at the dealership, you know, gets mansplained to, gets ignored. And actually, if I look at the likes of, I don't know, Trust Ford, who really want to know whether women prefer test drives accompanied or unaccompanied, which is a really great question that we don't have much data on. Or I look at some of the independent small ones like Wink Cars set up by two women in Birmingham. You know, there's some really good stuff going on at the sharp end that actually the car brands would do well to note. I think the problem for car brands is they can get tied into European or global marketing directives that make it hard for them to react in their domestic markets. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on at ground level.
And I suppose if you were to collate all of those best practices and bundle them up and sort of provide that as some advice either to the retailers or to the OEMs themselves, what are the things that you'd want to see as hygiene factors?
Well, it's interesting because my career when it comes to the whole gender conversation within automotive splits into B2B and B2C, you know. So what can the industry do to employ more women? And then what can car brands and car dealers do to talk to women better? But actually the two are inextricably linked, right? And so my number one is getting more women not only into the industry but to stay in the industry, to retain those women, to make sure they do rise up the ladder to board positions where they can affect the direction of a company and so on, is a crucial part of the B2C part of it. You know, until you've got more women in the brands and in the dealerships, you are not going to engage more women. It's as simple as that, because men will be reaching for focus groups and data to inform that decision as opposed to actually knowing what the right thing is to do. And I think the data does show us very clearly, having examined it, lots of it through my job at Auto Trader for 8 years now, there are fundamental differences between men and women in the way that they approach car buying, driving, the cars themselves, the dealership experience, finance, all of it. And the problem is that at the top end of that data interrogation, the top end of the sales funnel, when you look at what do women want from a car, what do men want from a car, the data doesn't look that different. You know, both men and women want practicality, good price, space, reliability. And that's where a lot of OEMs leave it and go, well, there's no difference, you know, we are gender neutral. But that as soon as you start to drill down at all within that data and get into the emotions and the language and what turns people on and off car buying, especially around electric, there are vast gender differences. And so they really need addressing with bespoke marketing campaigns for women on social, on their own sites, especially if OEMs are going to go agency model. They totally need more female-friendly content on sites. Everything, the whole gamut of it. You even speak to somebody right at the top of their game, who's CEO of a car company, they're still intrigued by how the car is designed and where the handbag can go, or where if the grab handles are going to chip nail varnish, because these aren't patronizing silly questions. They're questions that matter to women.
And it's amazing how, if you think about those touch points with a car, if something pisses you off, even if it's a small thing, that is the difference between loving that car and hating that car. So, like, as an example, on my charge port, it's like really, you have to kind of like get your fingernail in to take out the little plug socket for fast charging. Every time I break a nail.
Annoying.
And it's annoying. It's just annoying. It's not a vanity thing. It's just
spend our
annoying.
hard-earned cash on that manicure, so we've got to make it.
Yeah.
And we spend even more of our hard-earned cash on the car. So why are we going to go for something that annoys us slightly?
Definitely.
Exactly.
And you touched on the whole shift there to electric, which I can imagine for you has been a huge part of your career over the last decade or so, and will continue to be going forward. Imogen and I are both EV drivers, and we have been for a while, and we're really interested in the technology, and we're obviously very passionate about the environment and doing things which are greener and cleaner anyway. So I think that was a lot of the decision making behind our switch. But I think one thing that I'm having to get in my head, and funnily enough, I was back in Lincolnshire where my family are from at the weekend, and everything in Lincolnshire is kind of 5 or 10 years behind. Like, it's sort of playing catch up. So my dad and family have been very anti-EV, and now it's, we might look at one for your mum. So I think it's realizing for me that actually people don't need to buy an electric car because they care about the environment, and probably most of the people buying an electric car won't be those people. Certainly going forward, they'll be there because they, it might be the better option, it might be the cheaper option, it might be that they've got solar panels or whatever. But what has been the biggest challenge for you in communicating that change? Because it's probably one of the biggest societal changes we have seen and will see for a long time, in how people are changing something about their day-to-day life. And I struggle sometimes with that messaging and that explaining, and I don't know if the car companies are helping much.
Yeah. Again, right, you've got to look at the data. And again, we've looked quite a lot at this as part of car bar project that we've got coming out and things at Auto Trader. But so women are off the curve at the moment, as I'm sure you guys know, when it comes to buying electric cars. Far more men than women are buying electric cars, and that's got to change for mass adoption, or we're never going to get there. So we've got to ask yourselves why. And all the data shows that women just don't feel confident in making the switch. And the reason they don't, or they feel less confident than men in making the switch. And the reason they feel less confident primarily is because they don't have as much knowledge. And why don't they have as much knowledge? Because, surprise, surprise, we don't like watching car stuff on YouTube. We don't want to watch Top Gear, the Grand Tour. We don't want to read car magazines. We're not interested in them. And where else is anyone communicating to us about electric cars and all these mind-blowing jobs to be done that you have to do before you can even actually buy the car? Sorting out your home charging, sorting out your energy tariff, sorting out your smart meter. As soon as women see all that, given that women are already the primary carer in society for vulnerable adults or children or whatever, women go, oh, forget that. Like, where do I even start with all that? Yeah. And who's going to tell me, and where can I go to find this stuff out? And so car brands can't do and dealers can't do what they've always done before, which is wait for the consumer to be in market for their next car and wait for them to come to them to ask them questions. They've got to proactively get out there in the research phase, even before the research phase, right? Because we're always thinking about what next car we're going to buy, and start trying to tell them, look, it's really not as scary as it sounds, and so on. So that's a big element. It's like, get to where women are, go and speak to them at the gyms and the leisure centres, and when they're out food shopping, and when they're at the garden centre, and when they're at the nursery picking up their kids. Get the messaging out to them in women's magazines and where we like to exist and browse content. And also, I just think, car brands and dealers are not very good at putting themselves in women's shoes, and instead of asking them, what car do you want to buy next, saying, well, what's your lifestyle? Or if you're thinking about going electric, you don't necessarily need the most expensive car with the biggest battery with the longest range, because maybe you don't do many miles a day. All those sorts of things. There's so much. A revolution in technology requires a revolution in communication. And we haven't taken that on board as an industry. We're still talking about kilowatts and kilowatt hours. I mean, what the hell? Somebody should have told us, BHP and talk never worked for talking to women about cars. Why would kilowatt hours work?
Yeah. So true. It's so true. And I think this in having this discussion here makes total sense, some of the work that you've been doing alongside your day-to-day work, including the events you've been holding at beautiful locations across the UK. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that, shouldn't I? That was a very apposite. Yeah, She's Electric, I take it you're referring to, which is where I saw Abby a while ago. Yeah, that's been a lovely thing to do. That was born of me sitting down with the wonderful women at Still Curious Agency and Joe Elvin, who I mentioned before, and saying, we've got to get out there to women. We've got to take this around the country. We've got to do it at weekends in hotels or somewhere lush like Dalesford Organic. We've got to bring along slow fashion brands and cosmetic brands so that women can have a really nice retail and shopping experience. But crucially for me, the key component of She's Electric for me was put me on a panel or give me a Q&A session to myself with women in the room where it's a truly sounds really naff, doesn't it? But a truly safe space, a closed private space where women can ask those questions that they're too afraid or embarrassed to ask anyone else, like how heavy is the charging cable? Can you drive your car when it's raining or charge it when it's raining? Or will I get an electric shock? How much do they really cost to run? All those things, whatever it might be. I mean, there's questions that I hadn't even thought about before, and I thought, God, that's a good one. There's nowhere else for them to do that. They can't stand with their mates propping up the bar at the pub, chatting about this stuff because their mates probably aren't interested in doing that. We really are alone in this car buying process on our own. So it's just trying to make that simpler for electric.
How do we make explain the charging process and explain something which is quite complicated? Unfortunately, it's not been made particularly easy in this country.
No.
How do we remove the fear element from that and communicate in a clear and concise way how people public charge?
I mean, I think one of the things actually, and it sounds counterintuitive, is be honest about how bad it is. Because I'm fed up with sitting on panels alongside kind of early adopters and EV evangelists who say to the audience, oh, it's easy, it's fine, don't worry about it. All you've got to do is a little bit of planning before you start your journey. And then, everyone needs a 20-minute break for a cup of coffee, don't they? And I'm looking at the audience's eyes, I can see they've already lost everyone in the audience because the audience is thinking, what are you talking about? I don't want to plan my journey before I start it. And also, I don't want to stop for 20 minutes for a cup of coffee, even if I'm on a 4-hour journey. I know I should, but I don't want to. And I don't normally in a petrol car. I don't tell anyone. So I think it's about honesty and saying, the big motorway service stations with the ultra rapid chargers, you should be fine there any time of night and day, any day of the week, but it's going to cost you a fortune. It'll be the same as petrol. So just be ready for that. And then, you'll get to know where your local ones are, but they might not always be available. But don't panic. You'll get to know where your local ones are and which ones tend to work more than others. I mean, it's not a great experience at the moment. So what I suggest you do is X, Y, and Z. Just be honest about it. I think as well, a crucial thing, I was at the House of Commons, when was that, last month, when the BVRLA launched this Bonvoy Charge campaign, which is an awful name, but was about putting the spotlight on destination charging, which is a huge part of the equation that the public don't know much about, and MPs aren't doing enough to pressure local authorities to help local businesses. I think destination charging, this is one for the media as well. The media hones in on public charging. But if we can get more leisure centres, cinemas, offices, restaurants, hotels, all that to get charging points put in and set up, that's going to take a huge strain off consumers as well and the public charging network about usage and worrying about it.
And there's so much to be gained there because, for example, and just purely anecdotally, if I am booking a hotel or a holiday in the UK or going to a restaurant, I will prioritise the ones with charging. But also for these establishments, gyms, pubs, whatever, if you have got people there who are then having to have dwell time in your establishment, and they can also get some revenue share of that charger as well, that is amazing.
Yeah.
And it really, that can be capitalized on how you can direct people to specific experiences and build that experience. And, we recently went to Cornwall, there was destination charging. If there hadn't been, then we'd have spent, I don't know, probably £200 more in sort of charging costs using the rapid network. So it makes such a material difference. And I so agree. I think we're totally missing that bit of the story.
I love it when you go somewhere and stay overnight and it's free charging, because I feel so smug driving away thinking, none of you petrol users had free fuel to get here, did you? That is, I mean, who knows how long that will last. I feel like that might change. You know, some places will start going, hang on a minute, we've spent a small fortune powering all these EVs, but it's such an amazing perk, I think, when you stay somewhere. I feel like we need to build out like a Mr. and Mrs. Smith style app, but just
Yeah.
amazing EV charging experiences, whether it be hotels or spas or great shops. I love going to a farm shop and charging. That makes me feel like I'm really winning at life in my 30s.
Yes.
It can be like, that charging was free, and therefore I will spend £17 on sourdough. Not a problem.
That's right. Yeah.
The girl maths.
Yeah.
So we're recording this just ahead of the budget announcement. And there are some interesting things when it comes to electric vehicles, many of which I think you will have a point of view on. So I wonder if you can run us through what you think's good, what you'd like to see on there, what you think is not so wise.
Well, good. Labour came into power promising to cut red tape, and the electric car sector has been sorely in need of all that paperwork being cut for the installation of charging points, for the installation of the cross pavement gullies charging so that people without driveways can charge. All that stuff sounds kind of boring, and I imagine that's why lifestyle media aren't terribly interested in covering it and so on, but it's absolutely crucial. So that's really good to see. The electric car grant, which came along in July, was great. On Auto Trader we saw an uplift of 118%, I think it was, in interest for electric cars that had either got the official grant or had done their own version of discounting. So it's undoubtedly had a huge effect in interest in electric cars. I think I would be hoping in the budget, and if it's not there, I would be calling for it, realignment. The electric car grant could have been much better, and I think it could still be a lot better. It's currently targeted really at the wrong people. We should remove the grant from fleet sales and concentrate it only on private buyers, because salary sacrifice and company car owners benefit from lower benefit in kind taxation. They're going to buy anyway, they're going to make the transition anyway, but private retail buyers are fairly stagnant in the electric car market at the moment. They are the ones that need a big incentive. So I would say, focus the electric car grant on private buyers. The grant also really needs to be opened up to used electric cars. I think on Auto Trader we're calling for it to be opened up to used EVs under 20,000, because 90% of us buy used, we don't buy new. So again, if you're looking at mass transition to electric and something that will really boost the market, then you've got to look at the used side of the market and what you can do there. And I think this eligibility criteria for which cars are eligible, it's, at the moment it penalises countries which rely heavily on fossil fuels, and those cars made in those countries won't qualify. But actually they should be looking at the factories and the plants where those cars are manufactured, because you could have a country like China, which is still emitting a huge amount of CO2 from its energy usage, but actually specific car plants within China could be focused on 100% on renewables, depending on what company has done what within that country. So I think I love the fact that the electric car grant has been aligned to some green standards, via SBT initiative. But I think it needs more. The devil's in the detail, and it needs sharpening and focusing.
Yeah.
And if you had a magic wand and you could just click your fingers and something change, what do you think it would be that could have a real material impact on uptake and changing attitudes, and particularly, women getting on board a bit more?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, you could scrap the entire budget and just demand that, well, let's see, 46% of drivers are female. If 46% of the marketing budget of every OEM and every dealer had to be specifically focused on women and female consumers, I think that would shift more than anything.
Isn't it? It's the question I have. Like, it's simple maths.
Simple maths, and especially because, our media landscape is so splintered, it's very easy to actually find the audience to which you want to direct your campaigns, to make them specific to that audience as well. It's not rocket science, I don't think.
No. But speaking to that audience then, So let's say my mother-in-law, for example, I think she's tipping over, and she's potentially interested, particularly I think if there are grants that come off the used EVs. I think that's where, you know, her interest could really be pricked, and she may well make the switch. But what do you think I can say to her, and what can we say to people now who are perhaps in the next year or so thinking of going into a car garage for the first time and inquiring about an EV? What sort of things are good for them to know and good for them to ask, do you think?
Well, number one, I think is put your big brave pants on, and none of us like it. None of us like going into a dealership. None of us like trying to get to grips with new technology. And I think the first thing to realize is that electric cars are simply automatics by another name, right? Everything else, forget for now. They are just the cars that you've always known and driven if you've driven an automatic. And I think, you know, the car industry, again, has made a huge mistake in trying to sell electric cars as new tech, because all the data at Auto Trader shows that women are not interested in the word tech. It puts women off cars. And EVs aren't tech fests. They're just updated cars. They've got the same tech in them that brand new petrol cars have got in them, you know? So I think we have to really, we talk about demystifying, but I think really demystify, really get down to the nitty gritty of it, which is that they're just a car by another name. They just have to be silent, and you've got to plug them in. And then I think from there, it's, you know, go in with a little bit of a jargon buster. Don't let them derail you. I think a huge thing we come up against, and I see all the time, is when it comes to finance. And I think this is the thing that really worries women, that all the time, as soon as they go into a dealership, they think, oh, I've immediately got to be on top of, are they going to scam me? Are they going to try and sell me this? And then we're going to talk about finance, monthly finance plans. And I don't know if I should buy outright or I should be a PCP or leasing, what the hell? And that's probably the only bit of research I would say to do beforehand. If you know you don't want to buy outright, then just Google PCP and Google leasing and get a little bit of detail about those two things, so you feel empowered. Even if you're wrong, at least you'll have the confidence and feel empowered. And I say, if at any point you don't understand what anyone is saying to you, say, sorry, I don't understand what you're saying to me. Could you explain again in words of one syllable?
Yeah.
Somebody should be employing us and paying us handsomely for these insights.
Well, quite. We should say we're not releasing this podcast unless you fund both of our podcasts, and then you can have the insights.
This is an expensive little focus group right here.
Yeah.
And Erin, there's so much stuff that you do within the industry. We obviously mentioned She's Electric. Do you want to talk a little bit about what else keeps you busy in your day-to-day life?
I'd love to.
Busy.
Thank you very much. Well, I've got the wonderful Women in the Driving Seat podcast, which I've just looked at the metrics for and seen at least half the audience is male. So that's very interesting. But that's all the wonderful women in the industry, because the purpose of that for me was just trying to get more women into the industry. So I really hope parents listen to that podcast and tell their daughters to listen to it. Like, you know, motoring journalism, being an engineer, being a sustainability expert, a CEO, whatever, you know, it's all fascinating. Racing driver, anything. And also I've had women come in from other outside. Lucy Siegel, who you guys probably know, great sustainability journalist. She's come on to tell us what we're doing wrong in the car world and so on. And Joe Elvin again. So, God, this is turning into a Joe Elvin episode. She'll love that. So
We'll have to get
there's that. And then I do my monthly Vogue on the Road column, which, you know, talk about trying to reach out to women. I mean, hats off to Vogue. No other female women's lifestyle magazine has been consistently publishing car content as Vogue has. I've been doing that column for 3 years, and somebody else did something similar before me. And you think, come on, guys, if Vogue is willing to do it because they see a connection and interest between their female audience and cars, then where are the rest of you? You know, it's no good anymore to say that you don't think your readership is interested in this. It's rubbish. And also consulting for Goodwood. Goodwood is an interesting case with Festival Speed and Revival and trying to get more women along to that as well. I mean, it's all part of the whole, right? It's just we've got to get more women involved and interested in this glorious industry.
We will make sure that we share links to all of those things. And actually, I think I'm joining you on your podcast in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm really
I very much hope so. I will be badgering you for times as soon as this podcast finishes.
Well, Erin, thank you so much. This has been a total joy, as we totally expected. So,
it's been lovely. Thank you very much. It really has been.